As soon as I was released from the hospital, the addiction took over. And, I told my mom I needed to drink, and we get back to the house, I start drinking. I got 30 staples in my back. I'm in a hospital gown. I start drinking, and my mom goes and checks on her dogs that were sitting at home. And I called my dealer over, and I started getting loaded. And my mom shows back up, and I'm just out of my mind. I'd just gotten stabbed the night before. At this point, my dad was in prison, and my dad was trying to be a father from the prison walls, inside the prison walls. And he told my mom, get Tyler out of that house right now, and get him to somewhere that's a little more safe, right? My name is Tyler Bowman. I'm the co-founder of Monarch Recovery, and this is my addiction story. I grew up in Oxnard, California as a child. I was raised by my dad. My was dealing with addiction, of methamphetamines. And so, growing up, my dad was clean and sober. My dad was clean for the first 6 years of my life. And, I didn't really have the best relationship with my mom. I would go over there as a child, and it wasn't, what it looked like was that, my mom was, always in her bedroom. There wasn't any cable. And so I would only be over there for a period of time, and then I would return to my dad's house. And during that time, like I did have a good, I would say first 6-7 years of my life. I had stepbrothers and stepsisters, and my dad was in a relationship with my stepmom. And, we're running around on the beach. I'm a little kid, so I was, involved in going to the beach, going to the lake sometimes. My dad was a general contractor, and so, he did what he can. And I would say, for the most part, living with my dad when he was sober, as a kid, I didn't really experience too much of, the addiction side of things. My dad tried to keep me away from my mom for the time being, but, every now and then I would go over to my mom's house, and I didn't really necessarily put 2 and 2 together. I just thought it was the norm. Around 6 or 7, we ended up moving off of the beach, and we moved to Port Hueneme, and that's when things started to I started to notice some things, as a kid, and what I would find out to be is that my dad relapsed, right? And being with my stepsister and my stepbrother, as a kid, it was in my dad's addiction, it was the doors were closed at all times, right? Locked in the bedroom, and us as kids, we were just kind of free to do whatever.
Did you get into trouble as a kid because you had that freedom?
I did, definitely. I was younger than my stepbrother and sisters, and I would always look up to them, right? Or I'd follow the leader kind of thing. And, we'd be hanging out with older kids down the street, and the ding dong ditching, things like that. And I was such a young kid that, I was just doing what everybody else was doing. I could remember when I was about 8 or 9 years old, my sister at the time, she was 12 years old. We got together with a friend, and he brought some marijuana, and, I don't think we ended up smoking it, but I don't think like I experienced that high yet, doing things like picking up half lit cigarette or half cigarette butts off the ground and going behind the dumpster and smoking that, like that was like the introduction to like kind of my behaviors, right, in a way. My stepbrother was always like I would say he was the good kid in the family, and he would always like tell us, we're stupid or this and that. We had my step uncle, my stepmom's brother, that was living with us, and I was very close to him. Like I was involved in football and stuff like that, and for some reason, me and him really connected, and I'd probably say we were more connected than he was with his, with my stepbrother and my stepsister. And then one day, like I come home and we had another guy living in the house, and he had told me that Jimmy had committed suicide. Right. And that impacted me pretty heavily.
What age were you when that happened?
I would say 9 years old, 8 or 9 years old. And it was like the first loss that I've ever experienced in my life that was someone that was super close to me, and shortly after that, my stepmom ended up moving out to New Mexico to be with family, and them being in their addiction, it just caused my dad to his addiction even took off even more, right? And we ended up moving to my grandma's house, and at the time, my mom was just getting into recovery. She had gotten caught with getting loaded. She was an RN, she was a nurse, and she'd worked overnights, and she got caught, and obviously she had to go into the nursing diversion program, and which led her to sober living. But there was like about a 3-year period of time where I lived with my grandma and my dad, and I began to notice like that my dad wasn't around. I remember my mom or my grandma was an alcoholic, and so every night I'd experience my grandma drunk, no teeth, just talking on the phone, being very, very upset with my dad. I remember seeing new faces every week, at the house, and just wondering, like, I always wondered, like, what is going on here?
What was school like for you?
School was good, I definitely had to move. I moved around a lot, like when I moved from the beach to Port Hueneme, obviously I moved schools, and being in a school in Port Hueneme, it was definitely different, right? And I was there for a short period of time before I went to Ventura. I moved to Ventura, and I went to Will Rogers Elementary School, which is right around the corner from here. And I do have a story about like being in 5th grade, and that's when like I started smoking weed for the first time, and I actually got high.
So you didn't act out or anything, even though you were having issues at home, you still maintained school and friendships?
I did maintain school, but I was kind of like the class clown, I would say. And, obviously, like, me and my buddy, we brought a marijuana pipe to school, and he ended up getting caught with it, and he told on me. And I remember, like, my dad showing up, and the police were there, and I never really got in trouble. My dad was structured when, growing up, but I think, his guilt and shame due to addiction, he didn't really he didn't know how to be a father at that time, right? Like, he did his best, but yeah.
So when you smoked weed, did it give you? Did you do it like to belong in your friend group? Did it give you like an escape from your family life? How did it make you feel?
I think it was more of like I wanted to fit in, like it was like growing up, with my stepsister. I was always the follower, right? And my stepmom smoked a lot of weed, and I just thought it was the norm. I didn't know the effects of drugs and alcohol would be later on in life, but it definitely gave me a sense of belonging and a sense of fitting in with the other kids, and obviously I wanted to be liked. And so I think I got my validation through school rather than at home, because when, I would be at home, it wasn't a pretty scene. I was isolated in my room. I'd play video games, every now and then I'd go out and play outside. So like, moving out to Ventura, it definitely was a change of scenery. And it was definitely different because I didn't have my stepbrother and my stepsister there. It was just me, my grandma, and my dad, which my dad wasn't around. And so, yeah, it was hard, and I also, I would have friends, on the street, and my friends weren't allowed to come over to my grandma's house because of my dad, because of the addiction that was taking over there. It was bad. It was cops were there every week. People that I didn't know were just coming and going, and it was just kind of like it was a trap house, right? Like, people were getting high. There were tents in the backyard. And that's when I started to realize like what exactly was going on.
When did you start experimenting with other drugs or drinking?
So I would say around 12 years old. At 11 years old, I remember sitting at my grandma's house, and I haven't seen my dad in 4 or 5 days. I'm playing video games, and all of a sudden the detectives come in. There's detectives that come into my room, and they immediately shut off my TV. They start interrogating me. I have no idea. I'm super scared. I'm this 11-year-old boy who doesn't really know what's going on. All I know is that like I haven't seen my dad in a while, and they started interrogating me, asking me questions about, the last time I saw my dad, different things like that. And only to find out that, my dad had gotten arrested for a home invasion robbery. And that was that impacted my life immensely. I was this 11-year-old boy, and like I said, my mom was just finishing up her nursing diversion program, and there was times where, I'd still be with my grandma, and my mom was just starting to figure out what she was going to do, and I was just this 11-year-old boy, like wondering, like, when's the next time I'm gonna see my dad, and so when I experienced with drugs and alcohol is shortly after that, I found alcohol. I drank alcohol for the first time, and I got drunk for the first time. I want to say my grandma had pop off underneath the kitchen sink, and she kept it there. And I remember taking a swig of that, and like everything that I was mad at, everything that I was like feeling inside just kind of went away. And at the time I was in middle school, and now it was about the time where like I really felt like I needed to fit in somewhere, and smoking weed was becoming the norm, right? And I just remember once I found alcohol, I was off and running. Like I would do it on the weekends, whether it was at the skate park or however I can get it, like I was just doing that to kind of fit in, but also, numb the feelings of like being without my dad, and yeah.
When did it stop being fun and start feeling like a need?
Um, I would probably say after high school. During high school, like my house, I had moved in with my mom, right? And at this point, my mom felt like the guilt and shame of not being there for me when I was younger. And so she kind of like felt the need to give me whatever I wanted, right? Or let me do whatever I wanted, right? And so, the through high school, that I kind of used that as my advantage, and I manipulated her. And I told my friends, let's all go to my house. My mom she wasn't cool with it, but she wasn't going to say no, right? I think my mom felt like she'd rather have her son home than somewhere else drinking. And so, like obviously cocaine came into the picture. I was 14, 15 years old, and that was like the weekend thing, through high school. It was the weekend thing. And then once, I got kicked out of high school and I started doing homeschooling.
Why'd you get kicked out of school?
Just truancies. I was ditching school. I was ditching school all the time. And, my mom was having to go to court and, all this money. And I'm also a type 1 diabetic at the same time. And, I think I used that as my excuse. And, it just became, it started to become like every weekend. And then there were like periodic times throughout the week, that, I just didn't want to go to school. And so I would act like I'm going to school, and I wouldn't show up, and I'd go drink with my friends at someone's house, or, there was always a house to go to for me, whether their parents were at work or something like that.
Did you feel like that you had an addiction in high school? Or were you just doing what you needed to do to get by?
No, I think it was still fun. I think it was kind of like the high school thing to do, where, like the high school parties and showing up to the high school parties and drinking a lot, doing cocaine in the bathrooms. Like I became addicted to that lifestyle, right? Like I always felt the need to be somewhere else, and be having fun. And I felt like the only way for me to have fun is if I was drinking and doing cocaine.
Did that lifestyle continue after high school?
Yes. Once I graduated high school, and I didn't graduate, my mom graduated me, once I got out of high school, that's when, it was an everyday thing. My friends were over. My mom would have to, wake up at 4:00 in the morning to go to work. She'd wake up at 2:00. She'd walk into my bedroom. I got like 5 people in there, and, we're doing cocaine. We're just staying up all night. And, I was just very selfish and very self-centered at that time.
How did you pay for your addiction?
So at first it was my mom. And then when I was 18, 19, I ended up moving. My mom had had enough. She could not have me in the house. She was just sick and tired of me just ruining my life. And so I ended up moving in the back house of my grandma's house. And that's when I really started to take off. And every now and then my mom, like, I would use my excuse for diabetes as a way to get money. And then shortly after that, I ended up moving in my dealer to my house. And that's kind of how it went. Like, I would middleman. I would go to the bars. I'd be selling it, I'd be making him money, and then I'd be coming home and he was just there, and I was able to make it work.
How long did you do that for?
I did that for about 4 years. That was every day, no job, just consistently, drinking. Some days were fun, and then when I would, I would try to, the next day I would try to outdo, the night before, right? And I would find myself blacked out in the middle of the street. I'd find myself getting in a fight at the bars. Whatever the case may be, during that 4 years, it just got, I couldn't control it anymore. My mom would find me, low on blood sugar. My blood sugar's at 37 and I'm unconscious, and she's shoving, fruit and whatever she can in my mouth to raise my blood sugar. And
what was the lowest point that you reached?
The lowest point that I reached was the decisions I was making, right? While I was intoxicated and getting loaded. There was a situation where I had crossed one of my best friends, and I couldn't fathom like who I was becoming. And this is a big point in what got me here is I ended up getting stabbed 14 times in my sleep while I was on the couch. And I just remember, like just getting attacked at 3:00 in the morning. And, after that, I just look at myself and I'm bleeding. There's blood all over the floor. And, I called my mom straight away and I said, I just got stabbed. I ended up going to the hospital. And I just remember telling my mom, like, am I going to die? And I was in complete fear of my life. And, I promised my mom that I was done. And, I really meant it. I really meant it, with everything I had. I was at a point in my life where I just hated who I was, and as soon as I was released from the hospital, the addiction took over. And, I told my mom I needed to drink, and we get back to the house. I start drinking. I got 30 staples in my back. I'm in a hospital gown. I start drinking, and my mom goes and checks on her dogs that were sitting at home. And I called my dealer over and I started getting loaded, and my mom shows back up, and, I'm just out of my mind. I had just gotten stabbed the night before. At this point, my dad was in prison, and my dad was trying to be a father from the prison walls, inside the prison walls. And he told my mom, get Tyler out of that house right now and get him to somewhere that's a little more safe, right? I ended up going to Motel 6 for like 3 or 4 days, and I just went on a complete bender. And I had a family friend. It was my dad's high school sweetheart, and my dad had reached out to her, and I had no resources as far as recovery goes. My whole family is addicts and stuff like that, but I feel like they, my brother went to Kepra. But other than that, I didn't really have resources, let alone did I want to, change the way I was living. I would say I was too afraid to leave the people I was surrounded by, right? And I was in Motel 6, and I got that call that would change my life forever. And you know, it was my dad's high school sweetheart, you know, Annie, and Annie, bless her heart to this day. I'm so grateful for her. You know, she said, Tyler, what the fuck are you doing? You know, I think it's time for you to get out of Ventura and get some help. And right then and there, I had surrendered for the first time in my life. And I hit my knees and I started crying. And, you know, I told her, I need help. Whatever you can do, I need help, and I'm willing. And like, the addiction's crazy, because even when I got off of that phone call, I didn't trust myself. I didn't think I was going to go. You know, I told her that, like, she would have to physically come get me, because I knew I wasn't capable of driving all the way out to LA. And sure enough, she showed up the next day, and I got in the car, and you know, that was that. She dropped me off at an intensive outpatient program, and you know, I did intake there, and that was my first experience. Like, I didn't go to detox or anything like that. I strictly, like, I didn't want to be locked down, right? Like, my addiction was still running active. You know, I told Annie, like, I'm only going to do this for 30 days, right? Because I already had reservations to go do 30 days, get my family off my back, and just return home and continue to do what I was doing, right? I was so uncomfortable in my skin. I was so uncomfortable with meeting new people and being in a new sense of community. You know, it was just out of my element. And, I showed up at the IOP. I did intake, and you know, the Sober Living had sent, you know, a couple of the guys to pick me up, and you know, my image of Sober Living was completely different from what it actually was, right?
What was your image of Sober Living?
A lot of unhappy people. A lot of people that didn't want to be there. I didn't realize that Sober Living was full of people that just wanted to help one another. And I'm grateful enough to go to the Sober Living I went to, Designed for Recovery, because when I got there, I was shown, like, they showed me so much love, you know, and it's what I needed at the time. Right? Like, again, I'd just gotten stabbed. I have 30 staples in my back, and I'm showing up, and they made me feel at home. You know, they made me feel a little bit more at ease, because, you know, on the way to LA, I was just in my head thinking of all these different thoughts, you know, that just weren't real, you know, and you know, that Sober Living really changed my life.
How long did you stick with that program?
I stayed in that program for 18 months. And so, you know, like, it's funny because, like, you know, I would get the 30 days and I was just in this pink cloud, and I didn't, I couldn't imagine myself staying 30 days sober, you know, and like, I did it, right? And that 30-day thought of, like, going back home, like, wasn't a thought in my head anymore. And at 4 months, I thought it was a good idea to move out with a housemate, you know, and I remember, you know, at that time I had a sponsor. I was working probably my first or second step, and, you know, I go to the house manager and I tell him, you know, like, I think I'm going to move out. and get my own apartment, you know, and he was like, Tyler, do you realize that that's just untreated alcoholism? You know, and I remember being upset, and he was like, why don't you call your sponsor? And you know, I called my sponsor, and my sponsor said the exact same thing, you know, and thank God, because the addiction side of things were telling me that I can do it, right? That I can move out, and I'm recovered, right? And I'm so grateful that like I ended up staying, because the amount of knowledge and support, and you know, the amount of recovery that I got within that 4 months and the 18 months are things that I take today, right? Like I continue to work a 12-step program.
After you completed that program, where did life take you after that?
I was working in treatment at the time, as a tech, and you know, to be fair, that I moved out of sober living not on good terms. I had left because I broke up with a girlfriend that I was with for, you know, a long period of time, and when I left sober living, I went straight back to Ventura, and I was living on a friend's couch, you know, and I was driving out to East Hollywood for work, and you know, I did that for about a week, and my sponsor called me, and he said, Tyler, what are you doing in Ventura? Get back out here. Let's get into the work, right? And lucky enough, I had a coworker that had a room for rent, and so I ended up moving in with her, and so I lived out in LA for the next 2 years, and I was working in treatment. I stayed loyal to the treatment center that I was working for. I started moving up. You know, I went from a tech to a case manager, all the way to assistant program director, while all doing the 12 steps. And you know, I had a huge fellowship out in LA, and for once in my life, like I felt like I was doing the right thing. You know, I could actually live on my own. I could actually, you know, hold a job, you know, not only hold a job, but I was getting promoted, which was a good feeling. And so all these things like that were, you know, that were showing up in my life, was I started to realize that like the more I focus on recovery, the more my life gets better.
Did you get support from your friends and family back in Ventura?
Absolutely. I didn't necessarily, there were a few friends that I had that I still stayed in contact with. You know, a lot of my friends here were, you know, are the people I was using with, and so what I realized is that they were more of acquaintances rather than like friends, but like I had very few like solid friends that actually stuck with me and supported me through my recovery. You know, the funny thing is my dealer that was living with me, he actually stopped doing all that stuff, and he started working, and he's a big time electrician now, and so like I had those very few friends that like supported me. And you know, I remember, as far as family goes, you know, my dad was super proud of me. He was still locked up. He ended up getting a 17-year prison sentence when I was 11 years old. And you know, I would talk to him because he would have a phone on the inside, and so he could FaceTime me and stuff like that. And so I definitely was able to get some, you know, some solid feedback from him as far as like life goes and stuff like that. And you know, my mom, like I owe everything to my mom, you know, because she's the one that really was there for me in my addiction as well as recovery. She there's so many things that like I put her through, and I remember doing a ninth step and saying my amends. And I sat down at that table and I made my amends, and my mom said, Tyler, like, this is the biggest gift that I've ever gotten. Like, I can sleep at night knowing that you are safe, and that was huge for me to hear that out of my mom's voice, because when I did a 4-step, like, all I saw was my part. Like, when I looked at my mom, like, I started to realize that, like, she wasn't in my life because she was one of us. She was an addict. She was an alcoholic, whatever you want to call it, right? And I started to realize that, and so, like, being able to say amends to my mom and hearing that from my mom, like, it meant the world to me.
How old are you, Tyler?
I'm 31 years old.
How long have you been sober?
So I originally started in 2017 when I was 23 years old. While I was working in treatment, I ended up having a little boy, and when I moved, and me and my brother were talking on the phone. I was in LA, and he was down here, and we were talking about opening up a sober living, right? And like, it would die down and then it would come back, and like, eventually it got really, really serious. Like, we started to get serious with it, and at the time I ended up getting my girlfriend pregnant, and that was like, that made me realize, like, I need to move back to Ventura, right? And that way I could be a dad. I can be with my brother. We could help build Monarch, and during that time, I was leaving a fellowship out in LA that I was super connected with, right? And I was coming to Ventura where, I didn't know anybody in recovery, and this was during COVID. This was like, I think 2020, and where there weren't meetings. The meetings were at the park and stuff like that. And I moved back here, and, I started to see the behaviors come back, right? And I ended up smoking a joint. I ended up picking up, because I let go of my 12-step program.
Wasn't this around the same time that your brother relapsed as well?
It was. And I kept it a secret. My brother called me right away when he had relapsed, right? And I kept it a secret because my disease was telling me, oh, it's just weed. Nobody's going to know that you're going to, that you smoked a joint up in Monterey, right? And what I have realized now is, like, the only person that I was affecting was myself, and through step work, like, it caused me to get back into the program, right? And I ended up getting a sponsor and working steps. And, going through my 4-step, it led me to get honest with my sponsor. And he told me to get honest at a meeting level. And that's what I did.
What is the 4th step?
So the 4th step is, it's an inventory. It looks at, my behaviors regarding, my upbringing. What have I done to others? What have they done to me? It's a way of, being able to work through the inside, and obviously, you put the pen to paper and you start to realize, like, that, I have a part in every situation, right? whether it's good or bad. I always have a part in it, right? And I go back to my mom, and it's like I have a list of things that I've done to my mom, and all I could look at is my mom was an addict, right? Other than that, she was loving, compassionate, kind, caring, showed up for me, time and time again, always showed up for me, and so like I'm able to look at myself and see what how much damage I caused in my addiction, and how unmanageable my life was. And obviously, step 5 is being able to admit all that stuff to another human being. And for me, that was hard. It was hard because I didn't want anybody to know what I was going through, or how I was treating my mom, or what I have done in my past. My past becomes my strength. I am able to talk to other addicts, other alcoholics, from my upbringing, and I'm able to be completely honest with them, right? Like, this program is all about honesty. And in order for me to live a good life, like, I need to be not only honest with myself, but I need to be honest with others. And if I can just share a little bit of my story to another addict or alcoholic, then I'm gonna do it, right? Because what I have found here in recovery is support, is people that show me unconditional love, that will show up for me if I'm at the hospital. If I get stabbed 14 times in recovery, a lot of people will show up for me at the hospital. In my addiction, all I had was my mom that showed up for me. Sitting here it's a blessing. It's a blessing. Because I've lost 3 of my best friends that I grew up with in my recovery, right? And all due to fentanyl overdoses, and they were like literally family friends, that I grew up with. Their mom was watching me because my mom had to go to work and my dad was in prison, and all 3 of them are gone. And so today, like I utilize them as an asset in my life to be able to pray to them. And I hope that, they can guide me through just for today. Right. And, without God, this isn't possible, and the 12 steps led me to that, of a power of my own understanding. And I'm extremely grateful, and I'm extremely grateful to be next to my brother doing this thing together, because we've lost a lot of people, and we come from a family of addicts, and it was a long time for all of us to get clean, but it started with one person. It always starts with that one person in the family to inspire the next. Right. And I believe that's what we're doing. And not only our family, but to this community, and today I could tell you that, like, everybody in our family is completely clean. And that's a miracle. Like, that is a power greater than itself, and so yeah, I'm very grateful and honored, to be where I'm at.